Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to another one of our still COVIDing chats. I'm Kara, or Familia Hernandez Darling on Facebook, and today we're here to discuss a lot of the hot button topics or things that are on our minds in our community. It's really great that everyone decided to come out on a Thursday evening so that we could chat about these things. And as long as our group stays fairly small, then what I think I'm going to do today is intersperse our Q&A sort of after every topic. There's a lot of sort of different kinds of things that I wanted to talk about tonight, and so I think after each little topic, I'll stop and pause so that we can sort of share our thoughts or have a little bit of discussion because we're going to be jumping a little bit all over the place. And so, without further ado, I want to go ahead and dive right in so we can stay on schedule and have time to talk about everything that I'm hoping to share with you today. I'm just going through the Facebook groups a lot. I'm reading along. I'm seeing the different questions that people are asking and sort of what's on people's mind and thinking, oh, well, I wish I could explain. I wish everyone knew, et cetera, et cetera. And that was sort of the birth of this kind of hodgepodge little informational chat session. Now, I do have to give the disclaimer that I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. This is not in any professional capacity. I am just a person like you who's very interested in following the data and how a lot of these things affect our community and our families. So, um, and I did make my little document about to try to keep us on track. So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you now. We may still have some people trickling in, and that's okay. Um, all right. So can everybody see my screen? Can I get a thumbs up if you can see a picture of our friend, Mr. COVID here? Um, the first thing I wanted to talk about today, and that wasn't necessarily listed in the topics that we were going to cover, but with the approval of the mRNA new boosters, was there. We have a lot of questions right now about which booster do I pick? Do I wait on Novavax? Do I go ahead and do I get Pfizer or Moderna? What should I do? What's the timing of these things? I wanted to share with you guys. This is a personal choice, first of all, and I want to start by saying that to me, there's no right answer necessarily to that question. It's going to be very by individual based on your own health history and also your own risk profile. So somebody who is not taking very many risks and who is, isolating fairly successfully, maybe has minimal medical exposure, might make a different choice than somebody who, basically is, forced to be out and about or in contact, or maybe their job requires them to assume some more risk. Or if your kids are in school, those people may choose a different risk calculus than others. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about my decision and why I pick what I'm doing, and then I'll be happy to take questions. I can't promise you that I'll answer that I'll know the answers, but we can certainly talk about them. So for me right now, my family is very firmly in the Novavax camp. And we're very firmly in the Novavax camp for a couple of reasons. The first reason that I want to share with you today requires us talking just a little bit about COVID and how it works. So that's the pretty little picture here that shows you, one viron here of COVID. And I want to draw your attention here to this pre-fusion spike protein. So the spike protein here is divided by scientists into a couple of regions. Um, but the way that it works is basically when a viral particle hits your cell, then this spike protein is what is going to attach to one of the receptors in your cell, one of the ACE2 receptors, and that is what's going to basically fit in like a key and unlock the door and let the virus inject its genetic material into your cell and then hijack your cell to produce more copies of the virus instead of the normal things your cells should produce. And so when we talk about the vaccines, most of the vaccines target this spike protein. And the spike protein is divided into two regions. One is called S1 and one is called S2. And you can see here a little side view. There's some little colors, and you can see S2 here is the little reddish, yellowish part, and S1 is where the receptor binding domain is. It's the part that's on the end. And so the mRNA vaccines, well, all the vaccines grab some part of the spike protein, but the mRNA vaccines are particularly targeted to S1. They're hitting this part right here, allowing your immune system to recognize the end here of the spike protein, the part that attaches to the ACE2 receptor. Novavax has a little part of the S1 area, but is primarily targeted to this S2 region, the region that I think of like the trunk of the little tree of the spike protein, the part that attaches it to the virus. And so because of that, as COVID mutates and it's trying to figure out how to stick to your cells better and how to get into your cells better, most of the time the mutations happen in S1 region, in the region that sticks to that binds to the receptor, because COVID is looking for newer, better ways to unlock your cells and get into your cells more readily. The S2 region doesn't change as much. Any part of course, the genetic material can mutate and change, but there's not that evolutionary pressure on the S2 region, because basically if the S2 region sort of mutates incorrectly, then that makes the spike protein sort of not very well attached to the virus, and it makes it, basically, if the spike protein sort of falls off, and I'm being very, very, very oversimplistic here, but if this region mutates and it's not well attached, and then the spike protein sort of, falls off, it makes the virus non-viable, and then then it can't get into cells and it can't replicate, and those versions of the virus don't last as long as the ones that have the mutations up here in their receptor binding area. So this area of the spike protein does not change as much in the viable virus. That makes the immunity that you get from Novavax a little more lasting, a little more durable. Your immune system, when it's targeted to the S2 region, can identify more easily more of the variants, because the variants share this area in common. Whereas the mRNA vaccines, which are targeted up here to the S1 region, that region mutates. And so then that's why we need, more of the updated vaccines. Now, again, I'm being overly simplistic. Of course, Novavax is updating itself as well, because it does contain part of the S1 as a target. And the data shows that Novavax, in my opinion, in my read of the data, it offers, slightly better protection for most of the variants, not all of them. It's not like the mRNA vaccines, are legions better than Nova. And all of the vaccines that we have now, of course, we all know they're not, sterilizing vaccines. They don't protect us necessarily 100% from infection. What we're looking at is that our immune system is not naive to the virus and can fight it off more readily, so that they will protect us against severe disease. But they're all sort of subject to this process called original antigenic sin, which basically means that for certain viruses, the more that your body is exposed to them, instead of building immunity, it can actually trip up your immune system in the future, because the viruses are mutating so fast that your immune system basically may see a piece of a wildly mutated virus and basically mistake it for an older version of the virus, and then not fight off the new version of the virus as effectively. And a lot of the studies did show that the mRNA versions of the vaccine are particularly susceptible to this OAS kind of phenomena. There was a paper, and I didn't pull it out for this presentation, but it is posted in our antigenic sin threads, I believe in forward motion and in high risk. And it showed that they could actually take a person who had COVID and sort of reverse engineer and go back and see which version of the vaccine they had by sort of tracing this OAS phenomenon. So basically the less mutating regions, it's better to have your immune system recognize those. And as when stuff doesn't change, it gives you a better chance at an immune response. And so personally for my family, we have a lot of weird immune abnormalities in my family, and I'm just more comfortable now with the Novavax than I am with the mRNAs and the original antigenic sin issue, as well as the region that it targets. And then, of course, like the technology is the old technology. It's been around a really long time. It's not the newer mRNA technology. Not that I'm against the newer mRNA technology. The fast production of the COVID vaccine, I think, was basically a triumph of science, and we did get mRNA vaccines originally when there was nothing else available. We don't really want to be immune naive to a virus like this. We want to have, our immune system at least have some kind of recognition. But the side effects for the mRNA vaccines, the side effect profile is a little bit trickier. There's a lot of histamine response, which is an issue in my family. And so the Novavax is a better choice for us. So right now, though, that being said, like I spoke about earlier, my family is fairly, I mean, we're fairly isolated, or if we're out and about and doing our things, we're heavily mitigated. And so we sort of have the privilege of waiting for the new updated Novavax for that reason. And the other reason we sort of have the privilege of waiting for the new updated Novavax is because we also track our antibody response. Now, caveat, you are not supposed to consider any level of antibody protective against COVID. These tests, there's caveats all over them. There used to not be a lot of data about what level actually afforded you some protection, but you can. This is the LabCorp version of the spike antibody test. There is also a Quest version of the spike antibody test. And what you can do that is helpful, in my opinion, is you can track your own immune response over time. So we know that, basically your immune response really kicks in after you have a COVID vaccination around the 3-week mark after you're vaccinated. And then it varies wildly for everybody. Everybody's immune system is different. Some people hold immunity for 6 months. Some people hold immunity for 3 months. Some people don't mount a very good immune response at all. And so what you can do is you can ask your medical provider for an order to LabCorp or to Quest to get the SemaQuant spike antibody test, and you can chart your own levels, and you can see what you had pre-vaccine. And then you can see your curve. You can see after you get the vaccination where your antibody production sort of rises to what level, and then as it drops, you can sort of tell as your protection is waxing and waning. It's only applicable to you. For example, this is actually my antibody level after I got the my Nova series booster. And it was about 3 months after my Nova series booster. And for me, this is a pretty good antibody level. The positive is, greater than 0.8, and I was at almost 14,000. And as my antibodies come and go, that's a pretty good level of protection for me. But compared to my son's, who was actually getting his booster at the same time, his was greater than 20,000. He maxed out the reference range. He also has a lot of like a very hair thin, hair trigger immune system. So that he had a high level of antibodies too, but you can see the difference. And mine was 14, his was 20. It depends. And so if you're not tracking your own antibodies individually, then it doesn't give you as much information. I do believe, if I remember correctly, when I was trying to dig and find like the research material, and again, I didn't bring this for you either, that to get any kind of protection here, you wanted the antibody level to at least be around 1200. But again, what that means, because this is also not like neutralizing antibodies. This is just a sort of rough measure of your body's immune response to the vaccination. This also will be positive if you have a COVID infection. So this is not specific to the vaccination. It's vaccination or infection. And this is also not to be confused with the nucleocapsid antibody. The nucleocapsid antibody will not be positive if you have had a vaccination. It will only be positive after an infection. And so you can see here, this is my negative nucleocapsid antibody. I've been fortunate enough that as far as we know with frequent testing to never have had COVID. And so my body doesn't have any nucleocapsid antibodies because it's never actually been exposed to the nucleocapsid of the virus. But my body does have the spike protein antibodies because I have been vaccinated against COVID. And so when you ask your healthcare provider, you do not want an order for the nucleocapsid antibody, or you can have the nucleocapsid antibody if you're curious. But to measure to plot your sort of vaccine antibody response over time, you want the SemiQuant. It's called the SemiQuant because you cannot compare LabCorp to Quest to any other lab. You have to stay with the same lab because they have their own metrics and their own assay methods. So if you start out testing your SemiQuant antibodies at Quest, you want to stay with Quest. If you start out testing your SemiQuant antibodies at LabCorp, you want to stay with LabCorp because you can't cross compare them to each other. So that's my sort of update. We don't know when Nova is coming out. We do know that it's supposed to be within the next couple of months that Nova will have their updated booster released. And we do know now that, that the mRNA boosters are available. You have a lot of exposure and you don't have a good, antibody response, or it's been a long time from the last time that you were vaccinated, then you might want to consider going ahead and getting the mRNA. But what I tell people when they come and they ask, hey, should I go ahead and get the mRNA or should I wait on Nova? The first question that I ask them is, what are their exposures? And then the second question I say is, hey, how about you how about you go get a draw and let's look and see what your antibody level is, and again, that one number doesn't really give us a great amount of information, but at least we know if there's some immune response or not. So that's sort of what I have to share about the updated vaccinations. And I'm going to pause right here and ask anybody if there's any questions. You can type them in the chat and I will answer them to the best of my ability. We are small enough that we should be able to get to anybody's questions. If there's any questions or comments or things that anybody has to say about the boosters, the current boosters. No? All right. Well, we'll just keep on trucking then. Oh, does nucleic capsid show if you've ever had COVID? Yes. Well, with the caveat that some people's antibodies also do wane. And so if your nucleocapsid is positive, then you know you have had COVID at some point. If you have a pretty robust immune system or your immune system has a propensity to overactivity, then those nucleocapsid antibodies are going to last a long time. If you're immune deficient or you don't have a very robust response, your nucleocapsid antibodies may only last a certain amount of time after your infection. And that's that variance, right? Like some people have, catch COVID every 3 months, sort of like clockwork. Those people's antibodies are waning very quickly. Then other people, can go a year in between infections because they're holding on probably to some of that antibody response. So, but yes, in general, if you have a negative nucleocapsid antibody, especially if you if you run it every 6 months or something, if it's always negative, it's unlikely that you've ever had COVID. But it would be positive if you'd had it could be positive if you had COVID anytime in the past. I've heard some murmurings where I don't remember suggesting that mRNA might provide higher antibodies initially, but for a shorter amount of time. Novavax may be more durable, but maybe a lower antibody peak. I didn't really come across that in when I looked at the data. They look actually, pretty comparable. And again, that's going to vary wildly by someone's personal immune system. But that's the problem right now that we have with these vaccinations, and even with COVID in general, is that it's pretty fine-tuned to be able to, evade our immune systems, and everybody's body individually reacts to it in different ways. Some people it attacks their kidneys, some people it attacks their liver, some people it attacks their autonomic nervous system, other people it attacks their brain, some people, get a very acute response, other people are asymptomatic and then they have very severe long COVID. And so it's not regular. So I don't know, but in general, when I was looking at the antibody charts and all of that kind of stuff, they're really pretty similar in terms of the how the protection is offered and the antibody levels and all of that. The difference is that I think Nova's antibodies last longer, that they have a longer duration, and I think the mRNA antibodies wane a little bit more quickly. Are we ever going to get Nova for kids under 12? I have no idea, Nancy. They keep saying yes, and then there was clinical trial, and then it never comes, and so I'm right along with you guys. I don't know if we're ever going to get it for kids under 12. I hope so. Are the Novavax boosters shown to be at least as effective in mRNA despite the mRNA boosters target a more updated strain? I believe the answer to that is yes. And the reason why that they are allowing approval of the Novavax with the prior strain is because of that S1, S2 region that I discussed earlier. If you missed that, this video will be posted on our Still COVIDing YouTube channel, and you can go back and you can see the discussion of the S1 versus S2 spike protein regions. In your experience, should I work the day after a Nova vaccine? What side effects should I expect? Novavax has a much, much milder side effect profile. Honestly, the mRNA sort of knocked me on my butt for about 3 days. Novavax was a blip of a sore arm on my radar, and I think that mirrors what a lot of people have experienced. Now, I do know that, there are a few people that still got sort of that, rundown kind of achy flu-like feeling after Nova, especially people that are very sensitive. But by and large, anecdotally, the reports of the Novavax, when I had my mRNA series, I was clearing 3 days on my calendar to try and sort of take it easy on Novavax. I don't personally don't blink when I have it. So I remember a talk about original antigen extend in 2022, and it was that it wasn't an issue with mRNA vaccines. Was that wrong, or did the situation change? I would say that that was wrong. Of course, again, this is my personal opinion, but the original antigen extend data in 2022 was robust, in my opinion. Is 3 weeks after vaccination for full protection specific to Nova, or is that with mRNA? It's both, both mRNA and Nova. Did Moderna yesterday. Side effects are bare. Sorry to hear that, guy. Hope you feel better soon. For what it's worth, we recommend, or personally in my family, we use H1, H2 blocker and ibuprofen after vaccination because of the histamine response, especially with the mRNA. So an antihistamine that targets H1, like Benadryls or Claritin, something like that, and then an antihistamine that targets H2, like Pepcid, and then the ibuprofen around the clock can really help mitigate some of those side effects from the vaccines. Okay, so moving right along. I will get back here. And now I just wanted to talk a little bit about the mask ban. When I put this event up, that was really something really new. I think everybody really understands now where we are with the mask ban in Nassau County. And I know in North Carolina, we have been skirting around this, I find this to be not funny, but an accurate representation of, where we sort of have come. But the good news is that there is now been a legal challenge filed to the mask ban on behalf of people with disabilities and people who are immunocompromised. I did pull up here the Washington Post article that just hit, I believe, last week. Yeah, August 28th, so a couple days ago. So there is a challenge in court against this. This is what some of my friends did predict, that it would be not a really long time before this went to court. And then hopefully that will offer us some more protection. In the meantime, my thoughts about what I would do if I were traveling or lived in an area where the mask bans were in effect. The first thing that I did, and we have a whole mask parade in high risk. This is our dear Christina here in her Omni mask. The first thing that I would do is I would make sure and try to get some of these come clear masks with the window. I know Omni is back ordered right now until September, but there's the Salio Smile and there's some other ones that actually allow a little bit more visibility of your face. And so that's one thing that I would definitely invest in if I were in an area where I could be accused of obscuring my identity, simply by trying to protect myself from COVID. Now, we also there's the PAPR option, which is accessible to some people, that has basically full clear face visibility as well. So that would be another option for protection for people who can access it. And then there was a healthcare exemption written in. So if you are traveling through those areas or you live in those areas, having your healthcare provider write you a letter stating that, basically you are wearing a mask to protect yourself from an infectious disease. You don't even have to really disclose that you have an underlying condition. There are some people that are recommending you also have a prescription for your mask with you. I don't know if that's really any more helpful or not. If you have a law enforcement officer that's sort of peeved at you, they may or may not actually consider your documentation. But if you have your documentation there, it might thwart somebody who's just bored and trying to, bother people for masking. The other thing that I would also encourage you to do if you're in these areas, number one is use your Profi, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little while when we talk about the tools. But at least that way, if you are forced to remove your mask, you do have that level of protection. Obviously, this is going to be anxiety provoking for a lot of us, but trying to breathe and remain calm is going to be helpful. And then I would also, honestly, I would comply. This would not be a time for me to make a huge stance. If someone, a law enforcement officer, asked me to pull down my mask so they could verify my identity, I would take a deep breath. I would hold it. I would pull down my mask for a good, however long I could hold my breath, and then, try to put it back up. But I would not tussle with a law enforcement official over this, because when I'm in that interaction with that law enforcement official, it's the law enforcement official and I in terms of exposure. If I get detained or moved to custody, I'm not going to have access to a mask, and then I'm going to be, incarcerated with a bunch of other people. We all know that the COVID levels in our incarceration facilities are horrendous, and there's no mitigation. And so at this point, I would not be personally using resistance as a tool for change in my situation or my family situation. I would try to diffuse the situation as much as possible. And I'm not saying that's always possible. I know that, we definitely have disparity in the way that justice is applied in our country. And definitely this is going to target minorities. It's going to target disproportionately people of lower income and affect their ability to protect themselves. And so I'm really hopeful that the lawsuit that's been filed will be able to either modify or scrap this law. But in the meantime, personally, I'll avoid the area if possible. If I live there and I can't avoid the area, these are the kind of techniques that I will be employing. And one final caveat, and what I really wanted to do when I saw that mask ban was I sort of wanted to have somebody who I know that wasn't COVIDing walk into the police station and ask the officers which one of these clear masks would they prefer that we wear. I didn't actually get to the point of, executing that idea, but if someone lives in that area and knows somebody that might be willing to do that, I think that might be a worthwhile effort. if we could have a little, somebody to issue a little memorandum saying for immunocompromised people, we're fine with the Omni mask, or we're fine with the Savio smiles or whatever, then that also might be helpful. Now, again, if you're in a situation where you've peeved off someone with who's in law enforcement, they may or may not actually adhere to the rules. We know that, but at least it would be a step forward in our rights to protect ourselves. So invest in some clear masks, use your prophy, choose your battles wisely, and we'll be following along closely as the lawsuit unfolds to see if it can actually, achieve its goals. So I'm coming now to the chat to see what our comments are here. I'm picking up some questions here. The antihistamines do not blunt the effects of the vaccines. You will be fine taking antihistamines. You will still hold your antibodies. Antihistamines are not immune suppressive. They don't stop your antibody production. So it's okay to do that. Wondering if I got COVID in winter 2020, any chance of the nucleocapsid antibodies showing up before then? Yeah, they could. But they could also be gone because that's, 4 years. And so that's going to depend on your individual immune response, but you could certainly try it. Oh, thanks, Gertie, for confirming antihistamines and Motrin won't interfere with the vaccine protection. All right. Okay, back to the mask ban. Oh, there's a letter available to everyone as a clinician if yours won't provide one. So that's definitely a good, I would say that would be my second choice. My first choice would be to have my name on one with a physician, with an office that someone could actually contact. But that's great that there's a physician that has provided a letter, a universal letter for everybody. So. All right, so since it doesn't look like we have any other comments or questions on the mask ban, then I wanted to move on to COVID as airborne AIDS. And so let me see here. Hopefully you guys are seeing my screen again. Thanks, Cindy. I want to say right away, and maybe this is part of my diversity, but it really bothers me when people say COVID causes AIDS or COVID is airborne AIDS. AIDS is a very specific syndrome caused by the HIV virus. And I think that it sort of knocks, I think comparing COVID to AIDS is useful. And I'm going to show you where this came from, but I think it knocks our cred when we say stuff like COVID causes AIDS, because you could argue that AIDS is not disease specific, but really it is. I mean, and there's a difference in an acquired immune deficiency syndrome and the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, and that is the name given to a very specific medical condition caused by the HIV virus. So personally, I will not walk around calling COVID airborne AIDS, or I will not go around and say COVID causes AIDS, because I think that's just technically incorrect. And I think that it sort of screams, a lack of credibility in the way that I'm going to discuss things in the medical community. But I do want you to know where that comes from. And I do want to show you that there are similarities in the immune suppression and the acquired deficiency. And then there are some key differences in the way that COVID affects our immune system. So what I say is, COVID will cause immune deficiency similar to AIDS or at the level of AIDS for around 8 to 9 months. And that's after every infection. And then luckily for most people, the immune system can recover after COVID infection as long as they are not reinfected. And somebody called me out on that a couple of weeks ago and said, how do you know that? The studies only lasted for 6 months afterwards. And while the immune system was recovering, they weren't back to previous baseline. And I'm just going to tell you that That I know that because in the clinic where I work, we actually measure T cells, B cells, NK cells after every COVID infection, and we also measure them in the interim. And so we can again sort of plot these charts and see what COVID does to the immune system. And I will also tell again, like everything else, it varies widely. So for some people, it's going to knock out their B cells. For other people, it's going to knock out their NK cells. Other people, their T cell levels are going to drop. I would probably say NK cells are the most prevalent in our in what I've seen in people's lab work. But basically, this came about. So there was a couple of articles that came out and they did a comparison, and I did pull up the I'll share this document to probably with Christina for the transcript after we're done here. But there was an article that came out, AIDS and COVID are two diseases separated by a common lymphocytopenia. And that's where, COVID as airborne AIDS, the idea was born. And this is my favorite graph from there. And it basically, the light gray box are AIDS patients and the dark gray box are COVID patients. And you can see that, in many areas where we measure the immune system, in an active AIDS patient and a person who's had COVID-19, the white blood cells, the T cells specifically, but also, like I said, the NK cells and the B cells will do this. They will drop below the level or at the same level as somebody with active AIDS. And this opens us up for a plethora of opportunistic infections. We've seen, throughout the course of the pandemic, we've seen, the RSV hit, we've seen invasive strep A, we've seen a lot of weird fungal infections. We see, the different kind of pathogens that are taking advantage of the fact that COVID will knock our immune systems out for a while, and then they infect us and make it worse for us. And COVID is not the only virus that does this. I mean, obviously HIV does this on a very permanent kind of level. But measles also will wipe immunity out, and measles wipes it out, I believe, for a period of about 2 years. So COVID is not unique in its effects. I think it's a little bit unique in its irregularity. And then, of course, it also, people are getting COVID over and over and over again. And every time they get COVID, this is happening. And so we do have data showing that basically this is 12 weeks post-infection, 16 weeks post-infection, and this is at 6 months. You can see that the immune system does start to normalize again as you get farther and further away from the infection. It basically, sort of peaks out in its depression at 4 months and then will drop in most people by about 8 months. It restores their immune function is restored. Again, it's going to vary. But for some people who have long COVID, their immune systems don't recover. For other people, of course, that are serially getting COVID, then they're keeping their immune system in a constant state of dysregulation. And that's where we see those graphs, which I didn't pull for this one, but they're posted again in some of our threads, where each subsequent COVID infection gives you more chance of sequelae. And this chart, actually, you can see this is the number of DE genes. It's differentially expressed genes. So COVID actually comes in and it messes with your immune system's genetic material. And that's how it will, basically stop your body from producing NK natural killer cells, or stop your body from producing adequate B cells, or suppress your T cells. And so this chart is actually showing the number of differentially expressed genes. So when the viral material gets into your cells and replicates, it will get into the cells that are responsible for, regulating your immune system, and then drop those numbers. So COVID does not cause the AIDS. COVID does cause an acquired immune deficiency syndrome. COVID's effects, if you are infected one time and then you can protect yourself and not become serially infected, for most people last about 8 months. And that's that's sort of the caveat here. So if you see people in the group saying COVID causes AIDS, and then you hear us correcting them, this is why. But I wanted everybody to understand that where the basis of that came from, and how it is important to understand that COVID does have some really lasting effects on our immune system. So with that, I will take some questions. Any data on CD4, CD8 depletion? I don't know if you saw, Gertie, let me show you here, but it doesn't deplete CD4, CD8. CD4, CD8 is, first of all, that's a ratio. So that's your helper cells to your suppressor cells. CD4 are the cells that your T cells that call for immune attack, and CD8 are the ones that turn it off. And it actually skews that ratio so that you get a lot more inflammation. So you can see here that the CD8, the CD4 CD8 ratio actually goes high because you get tons of inflammatory cells and not so many suppressor cells turning things off. That's that whole almost cytokine storming thing, or the whole inflammatory response there with the CD4 or CD8 ratio. Let me see here. Is there a set of labs we can request to establish an immunoglobulin basis, or generally good as a baseline for future past? So yes, we actually posted a post-COVID lab set in Forward Motion, which are the labs that we recommend that you have drawn after every COVID infection. You could draw those labs pre-infection if you wanted to establish a baseline that they were normal for you, or what your levels are pre-infection. And then, like I said, in our clinic, we draw them after every infection, every time somebody gets COVID, so we can sort of plot and see what's happening with the immune system. What about the longer term effects, vascular damage, clotting, dementia? Are they going away after 8 months, or will this last beyond? Well, I think we all know that long COVID is an issue. Now that our population is less immune naive, and that now that we have, a little bit better understanding of how to mitigate the inflammation, the estimates have dropped from, 30 or 40% down to somewhere, 10 to 20% of infections people are getting long COVID from. It is important to understand that you can get long COVID from an asymptomatic infection or from a mild infection. You do not have to have severe COVID to get long COVID. So if you happen to be one of the unlucky, 10 or 20% that gets long COVID, then your damage may last longer than 8 months. And a lot of that is not necessarily the immune depletion piece that I'm talking about that's like into AIDS. It's that inflammatory response. You get into a perpetual kind of immune dysregulation. A lot of it is an inflammatory response. And so that's going to vary again by person. Some people do recover. They get long COVID is defined as, sequelae, a group of sequelae that lasts more than 6 months, I believe. And some people do recover have recovered a year or two in, and other people are still suffering from their original COVID infection in 2020. So part of that is going to depend on, where COVID affects COVID in the body is sort of like, again, I think of it like autoimmunity. Autoimmune diseases can happen anywhere. You can have them in your thyroid, you can have them in your pancreas, you can have them in your skin, you can have, and sort of wherever your immune system decides to attack determines the nature of your disease. And long COVID is sort of like that, wherever that inflammation sort of settles in. There's, some research showing there might be some persistence of virus for some people, not all people, but some. Then that's the system that's affected. And so it looks different. It does look different for every person. But there are things that you can do to mitigate your symptoms. We are learning more and more about long COVID. We're underfunded. There's not enough people still studying and helping out, but there still is funding. There still are some really good research studies happening out there for long COVID and people that are really getting a little bit better grasp on how to help people. I'm particularly interested in the dysautonomia aspect. Almost everybody who has long COVID is really debilitated by dysautonomia, and there's a lot of things that you can do to mitigate that. And so I think the most important thing is if you have long COVID, to find a medical clinic or a medical provider that can sort of help you unravel your individual constellation of symptoms. But definitely it can last beyond 8 months. I just want to add that I'm a white person. A lot of Black folks in a COVID cautious community space that I'm part of had said that for them, they feel it's really not okay for the stigma against AIDS to be used as a way to scare people about COVID, which is what's going on with airborne AIDS. It was an important learning dynamic for me. I mean, like I said, I really don't like, I think it's inaccurate. I do think it is, it can feel disrespectful to a lot of people who have HIV or have lost loved ones to AIDS. And I mean, personally, it's my person. When I see someone say COVID causes AIDS, I just want to pull my hair out. I really don't like it, which is part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to talk about the difference and where that comes from and how we can be a little bit more articulate and nuanced in the way that we discuss it. I personally will not refer to COVID as, airborne AIDS, but I do feel like the comparison can be useful sometimes in terms of when we're looking at the actual white blood cells and pressing upon people the importance of taking COVID immune dysregulation seriously. Can you explain the tension between being less immune naive means you're less likely to develop long COVID, and the more times you're infected, the more likely you are to develop long COVID? Okay. So if you are immune naive, then your body doesn't know how to respond to that virus. And so if you're immune naive, completely immune naive, then you are more likely to let the virus past your body's immune defenses, which will allow a higher level of viral replication, which puts you more at risk for severe COVID in the acute phase, and that can also give you more risk for damaging sequelae. The more times you're infected because of this immune dysregulation doesn't necessarily always give you better immunity. If you are getting COVID every 2 months or every 3 months, you're not necessarily developing the kind of immunity that you want from those infections because your first infection may have knocked your immune cells down to the point where if you're getting it that quickly, the second infection, your body may not be recognizing it to fighting it off because it's still immune suppressed from the first infection. And so that is actually impairing your body's ability to fight the virus and then allowing for more viral replication, which is, a higher viral load gives you more symptoms and more likelihood for sequelae. I mean, honestly, the ideal scenario is that we never catch COVID. If we have to catch COVID, catching it every, once a year versus catching it every 2 or 3 months is way better, because that gives our immune system at least some time to recover and then have an actual leg up in that immune response, hopefully, depending on the variants. If we catch it with, a couple of years apart, our immune systems may or may not recognize it. And so, I mean, ideally, we don't, we catch it as few times as possible. It's just the bottom line. But that's what I meant when I say when you're immune naive, you're likely to have a higher viral load, and that's going to likely translate into more severe symptoms. Um, no, I get it, Jess. This is a discussion. It's cool. Um, all right, moving on. Now, this is something that I think about a lot, and this might be a little bit depressing to sort of wrap our brains around. But I want to just reassure you that after we talk about the depressing part, we're going to talk about the uplifting part and what we can do. And so this is the question that we get all the time. When will this end? When will this pandemic be over? When will COVID go away? When will we be able to go back to normal? I'm going to share again. I made a pin post a couple of years ago. I'm going to share from that post that the answer is basically this is not going away. And if it's going away, it's only going away in the face of severe mitigation. So for those of us who are waiting, quote unquote, for things to get back to normal to let up on our mitigations or isolation, it's sort of like we talk a lot about water sanitation and how in the past it was normal just to drink from the Broad Street pump and get cholera and you lived or died, or you would know people that would get dysentery, and then there was sanitation, and now we expect to have safe, clean drinking water, and we don't get sick from it anymore. The fact that COVID is an airborne virus means that until we get that kind of sanitation or mitigation in the air, especially in shared public spaces, this will continue. So this back in September 2021, there was an article that came out that basically said, due to the nature of COVID, this pandemic is going to fractal. And a fractal, this is an example of a fractal. A fractal is a never-ending repeating pattern. And so if you look at this triangle and then every little triangle, inside every little triangle, you can see the repeating patterns. It also happens if you like turn your TV camera against itself and you see the repeating patterns. Those are called fractals, and you can mathematically, basically predict behavior of chaotic systems. And if you see a fractal happening, then they're sort of perpetuated. And so there was this article. I did go ahead and pull it back up here. Past the on the chaotic dynamics of COVID as a virus, and how that basically COVID infection was going to act as a fractal without the face of serious mitigation. And so that came out in September of 2021. I didn't run across it until spring of 2022. And when I ran across that article and read it, I had a nice little breakdown, sat down and cried, canceled my day, went to the beach with my kids, and then picked myself up and said, all right, what are we going to do about this? And started to work harder to try to bring you some of these kinds of, educations and community efforts that made me feel less impotent in the face of the knowledge that basically the takeaway is that the new cases and severe death will continue unless we have serious mitigation. So it would only end with improved air quality, ventilation, filtration, UV disinfection, universal masking in public spaces, better vaccines and better therapeutics, clear and truthful public messaging, and then understanding of therapeutics for long COVID as well. And we know that we are woefully lacking in most of these categories still. We are, in our fifth year of the pandemic, and there is, still not clear and truthful public messaging. We're lagging behind on the therapeutics. Our vaccinations will, help us mitigate severity, but they are not going to stop us from catching the disease. And so basically, I'm not expecting COVID not to be a problem for my family or our society for many, many years to come. So I've shifted myself out of this idea that this is going to be over, that this is going to end, and into a mind space that this is something that we are going to have to deal with long term, and so it's just a new kind of normal. So we're no longer in my family waiting to come out of isolation. We are learning about mitigations and tools that can allow us to navigate the new normal that we are living in. And in addition to COVID, as I think about pandemics and as I think about where we are, I really think that we're living in a time of multi-crises. And so in the groups, I will point out sometimes about how pandemics and climate change are, go hand in hand, and how we're entering this sort of era that, throughout history, you can look and you can see that we've been living in a period of before, pre-pandemic, in a period of relative stability in the United States. And now we're entering again another period of a period of multi-crises, which we've been in before. But when you're living through them, it's always, it's chaotic, and it is, difficult for people as we live through them. But I want to talk a little bit about the intersection of climate change and the pandemics, and how moving forward, that I think these multi-crises, they're not necessarily going to be less, they're going to be more as we walk through the next couple of decades. And so probably everybody here is pretty informed and following, this is the, surface temperature anomalies, and the yellow line is 2023 and the red line is 2024. And basically we're hotter than we've ever been. And we are continuing to get hotter. And a lot of the projections that were made that were sort of reassuring, or we can cap warming at a certain level, have been blown out of the water. It's just not happening. We're gonna blow past 2 degrees. And there are a lot of really serious consequences to heating up our environment in terms of our weather patterns, our food production, and pathogens. This also is the North Atlantic sea surface temperature. Again, the yellow line is 2023 and the red line is 2024. And you can see that we're way beyond. The seas are warmer than they've ever been. The land is warmer than it's ever been. And that makes things like COVID pandemics happen with more frequency. And the reason why that happens, I'll talk about in just a second. The other thing that I've got my eye on, and a lot of people are watching, is the AMOC. This is a current that circulates in the Atlantic, and it basically controls the weather patterns for Europe and the U.S. And it is based on salinity. It runs based on salinity of the ocean waters, and that is determined by how much fresh water is in the ocean. And so, as the ice caps melt and dump more fresh water in, then this current is slowing, and it is projected to basically collapse or stop sometime from 2025 to, I think the end was 20 maybe 2029. I don't I'm not remember the end date, but within our lifetime this is probably happening. And actually, by our metrics, every time they look at it, they move it up and they move it up, and this will drastically change weather patterns too. We're getting hotter and hotter and hotter, but this actually will cause this current collapsing will cause North America and Europe to get colder and colder. The last time this happened was it caused an ice age in the lower Dryas period. And so we just are in for all sorts of crazy weather patterns and issues with the climate change that's happening. And so this chart also sort of punched me in the gut, where you can see temps rose over 4 degrees over 10,000 years, temps rose 5 degrees over 5,000 years, over 8 degrees over 60,000 years. You can see the extinction levels, and then you can see us here in our current path and warming, and how we're just out of norms in anything that we have knowledge of in recorded or pre-recorded history. We're entering a time of real uncertainty when we're looking at climate change. And so what does that have to do with pandemics? Well, as the world warms up, then the pathogens mutate. And you guys are probably aware of like the Candida auris outbreaks that have been happening, particularly in Las Vegas and in the Western United States. And so basically, this is just one great example of how this yeast used to be evolved at a much lower temperature than body temperature. Like, its optimal range for survival was less than 98.6 degrees. And so when you got it in your body, the warmer temperature of your body helped kill the yeast, helped kill the fungal infection. But as the world has heated up and the outside ambient temperature has increased, the pathogens tolerance for our body temperature starts to increase. And evolutionarily, we start to evolve pathogens now that having a fever is not as useful to kill them, or our normal body temperature is not high enough to actually kill them. The closer the average temperature outside gets to 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, then the more pathogens we're going to see that evolve to be able to make homes in our bodies at that temperature. And Candida auris is just one example of them. And then the other thing that it does is it also increases vectors. This is tick-borne disease, and the cases of tick-borne disease from 2001 to 2019. And as things warm up, basically right now we're seeing a lot of mosquito-borne illnesses. There's West Nile in areas where it was not previously located. Dengue has come up to, New York and the Mid-Atlantic regions. As things get warmer, it affects, animal migration, it affects insects, and it affects the pathogens themselves and allows them to mutate. Then climate change also, can drive droughts, which will then in turn, as people don't have food, then they become, more malnourished, particularly in the less developed countries, and then their bodies are more susceptible to pathogens. We're seeing this right now with the monkeypox clades right now coming out of Africa. You can get a lot more mutation when are food stressors, and then natural disasters also lead to congregations of people, right? As people flee areas for flooding or hurricanes or wildfires, and they congregate, then again, we have a lot of, transmission forced by that as well. And then, these stressors can drive the spread of pathogens and pandemics. And so the fact that the weather patterns are changing and the earth is warming and that it will cause food stress, which will also cause, natural disasters and more pathogens to emerge. The permafrost is melting. We have some crazy scientists that are actually thawing out pathogens that have been frozen in the permafrost for thousands and thousands of years. And I'm like, come on, guys, let's please not do that. But the climate change itself is doing that, and so all of this can drive, some political unrest as people fight over resources, can lead to supply chain issues and societal disruption. And so all of this factors into when I look at the COVID pandemic and the fact that it's not going to end, and then it's juxtaposed now with this, minefield for future pandemics, as well as, political unrest and natural disasters and all of these things that are sort of coming together. And it makes me have to take a deep breath and then say, okay, well, what do we do? Where do we go from here? What does this actually mean for the way that I live my life and the way that I raise my children and the way that, I try to prepare them for this ever changing dynamic that we're moving into. And so I just wanted to share with you the things that I've done to sort of walk through this and come to at least some level of acceptance and peace in what we're facing and how to, how to deal with it and make it better. So the first thing that when I sat down and said, okay, COVID's not going away, and then we're juxtaposing this with multi-crises, and what am I supposed to do here with my family? How am I supposed to deal with this? Is I spent several weeks just trying to think about and have discussions with my loved ones about what makes life meaningful. And I told my kids, right now, even though we do have, the COVID pandemic that's limiting us, and we have to be isolated and live in a different normal. We are still in the before times in terms of these other pathogens and other, crises that I see coming down the pipeline. So what makes life meaningful? What really, when you get up in the morning, when your family gets up in the morning, why do you get up? Where's the joy? And we started to prioritize the things that bring us joy and live for today instead of 5 or 10 years down the road. And that was really hard for my family. We're very academically oriented. We have our sort of our plans mapped out for us. We had university, always in mind for the children, and then jobs, and then retire, like all of the things, right? And honestly, it's really had us sit back and say, okay, what is the trade-off between long-term thinking, which of course we do have to do, and where we are today, and where's that joy that I can find in living in the moment. And honestly, sometimes because of the overwhelm with all the juxtaposition things, one of the most helpful things that I've found is to break down my life into manageable chunks. Either I get through the next 5 minutes, or maybe I get through the next 5 days, or maybe I can look ahead to the next 5 months, but I'm bringing it into what makes life meaningful right now, and really trying to stay in the moment. So this picture is of my kid flipping out, and we moved when this sort of hit us, and afterwards, and we really wanted to be somewhere where we had some space, and that became super important to us. And this is her doing cartwheels once we finally got a place that wasn't right on top of other people. And then working on having the tools and flexible problem solving. So we sort of, I mean, obviously we're still academics. I'm still in all of the research papers and teaching my kids, those kind of skills and all of that. But what, learning to be a problem solver versus learning, rote list or other things that maybe in the past might have been more important, and incorporating the flexible problem solving skills and working on that as a skill has become real important to us, because when you don't know what exactly it is you're going to face, what can help you is your ability to look at a problem and flex and change. I mean, we've had to learn this with COVID, right? We've had to learn that if you're planning on an activity and somebody tests positive for COVID, then you change your activity, or you're looking forward to that much anticipated, a visit that from your family that you haven't seen in forever, but the mitigations aren't right, or the wave surges or whatever. You have to be able to flex, and so working on that flexible thinking and problem solving has become a priority for us. So in my family, the top three things that have really helped us expand our horizons, and again, this is going to be different for everybody. It's going to depend on your priorities and the things that that really make you tick and that you want to accomplish. But one of the things, we have a couple of extroverts. We have a couple people in my family that are introverts, and they're actually quite happy to do most of their interactions online, and and not have to, be out and about as much. Obviously, everyone wants to go be able to do the things that they want to do, but then a couple of us are really extroverts, and having a papper and knowing where and when we could go in a papper and what we could do in a papper really opened the world for us. And so you can see, my little one and I, she wanted to go to the Paranormal Museum on a recent trip that we took. I am going to talk about Papper safety and the science behind it, and how you can be sure and know that you're safe in a Papper, and where you can go in a Papper. Spoiler alert, you can pretty much go anywhere in a Papper, because it's a self-contained, breathing system with positive pressure. But for us, having the ability to wear our Pappers, which again, they are pricey, it is, I want to recognize that it is a position of privilege that allows us to be able to have them. But having, and I do think we need more efforts in terms of, and we have some things in the works for some community, some community crowdsourcing efforts to try to help people that are interested in this. Now, you have to sort of not really give, a rip what you look like. Like, we don't really care that we walk around looking like aliens. We're just happy to go and do and be in our things. And for other people, that might not be, as easy or a priority either. But for us, having the papper and being able to go do the paranormal museums. These are my young adults in their clean spaces, at doing things that we would never have been able to do even, a year and a half ago. And you can see on our YouTube channel, we do have a video up of our journey from N95 to Papper, and then you can listen to the way that Sean and I talk about Pappers there, and how tenuous we are, and how we're just, that video was probably 6 months after we started first researching them, and then we were just implementing, and now we're going to come again in a year later and talk about what we can or cannot do scientifically in the Pappers. Then the second thing that's really freed my family up to sort of explore these more meaningful relationships and connect with people is the plus life. And I'm not sharing these things, like, I don't, none of us in the coveting groups, we don't get commission from these things. It's not, it's just that these are the things that have allowed us to, start to sort of morph this new normal into something that is, meaningful for us. And having a PCR like quality on demand testing at home has been huge. And at first, it was Lucera, there were the detects, we had the Qs, we had the metrics, but having Plus Life and having the little app and knowing the sensitivity and knowing that, the Plus Life mini doc is actually really comparable to a rapid PCR test, and being able to utilize that at home so that we can have people visit with us in a safer fashion. We still, are obviously using filtration and ventilation and masking judiciously depending on what the quarantine scenario is. But Plus Life has really opened up a lot of doors for us. And then having the, oh yeah, here's the, for those of you who haven't seen, probably most of you have. For those of you who haven't seen, you can actually see the channels for the viral detection material. You can watch replication. This is the control. It's really, it's a cool system. If you're not familiar with it, you could certainly please go and watch our YouTube videos about Plus Life. But this has really opened doors for us to be able to safely gather. Um, and it continues to stay relevant for the future. We do find out Plus Life will detect both clades of monkeypox. So as we face monkeypox, and we're looking at that as a threat, getting a monkeypox test may not be always very easy, and having early test would allow you to then try to seek out a vaccine, which you can take after exposure for monkeypox to mitigate the severity of the disease. And so knowing that Plus Life will detect the nucleide was really important. Also, avian flu, it will detect the H5N1 strains. It doesn't tell you it's H5N1. It tells you that you have influenza A. But knowing that you can have some early detection, and then you can stop transmission as well as seek earlier treatment was really important to my family. And then Provi nasal spray for us. The fact that you can put 100 times a lethal dose of COVID in a mouse's nose that's treated with Profi, and then they have 100% survival rate was just amazing to us. And so having this as a backup layer, I mean, we have a Paperon, we have mask, we have Profi, and then, I mean, we have Plus Life testing, and then knowing we have Profi as a backup layer, all of these things came out of, my sort of quest and determination to figure out how can we do the things that make our life meaningful. I have two performing artists at home that music is really important to them, and being able to perform is really important to them. So having things that would allow them to do that is important. My little one really, really wants socialization, and so trying to create those opportunities for her was very important. And then, and what I do to try to sort of make a difference in the world, which is the way that I really sort of feel like my life is meaningful, requires me to interact with people. And so having these tools really, really made a huge difference in our family, and the way that we could do things, versus not having access. And then finally, we've actually changed our educational focus too. Like I said, some of it now is focused on practical skills. It focused on flexible problem solving. I just wanted to give one example here. Like for my little one who's going into the fourth grade, we are still homeschooling. Um, and instead of doing something, as academic as maybe we normally would, we've chosen things like 1,000 hours outside and getting to know, the environment, and learn living more practically here in the day, and the observation of what is now will make us more aware of the changes as they come, and also hopefully give us skills that might be useful regardless of any situation. And so caveat, this does have some optional religious things. If that bothers you, then you might want to explore a different one. We skip the religious content of this curriculum. It's not actually in the main. They're adjuncts, but I know some people don't want to support certain religious views. But it's just an example that I wanted to give you of one of the ways that we've morphed and changed in the ways that we're trying to evolve. And then the other thing is, trying to build reserves to insulate us from these fluctuations that are going to occur. There are going to be supply chain issues. There is going to be strain on the healthcare system. There we are going to go through these periods of crisis. And if you look at trying to build, your reserves for 3 days, and then once you get 3 days for 3 weeks, and then once you get for 3 weeks for 3 months, how could you go 3 days in your house with food and water and everything you need, and barring some other kind of, a wildfire burning you out, or barring, some other kind of medical disaster, can you insulate yourself a little bit? And it takes time to build these up. I mean, I've been working on this a while, and I do not have 3 months of stores or the ability to stay in our house and not have any kind of outside needs. But once you feel good when you hit these sort of milestones, and just know that you're a little bit better positioned to handle anything that comes. And so that sort of throws us into this like prepper arena, which I used to sort of cringe when I never really thought of myself as a prepper, or and there's a lot of really right-winged attachment to that term. But as I looked around and saw some of the really good information and resilient material out there, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's already there. So, this whole 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months thing comes out of, the prepper culture. And honestly, I've embraced a lot of it now, in terms of getting good information about how to try to sort of insulate us from those kinds of fluctuations and changes in a very practical way. Most people, we're not building a bunker or um, you know, doing things. We don't have an island and a private jet that we can, escape whatever calamity is happening, hopefully. But we can have, 3 weeks worth of food and water so that when a derecho comes through our town and knocks everything out, we can help ourselves and help our neighbors and feel like, our feet are not as much knocked out from underneath us. And so, one of the places that I did for when I first started, watching and looking, there is a YouTube channel called City Prepping. It is a little bit melodramatic sometimes. Don't get me wrong, but it's pretty politically neutral and it's a nice synopsis. And so, oops, I wanted to just share that channel with you. Anybody who is interested in sort of getting the basics of that. This City Prepping channel, it's for people that live in urban areas. It's not for people that have homesteads or can be completely off grid, but it does actually sort of break things down in that 3 day, 3 week, 3 month things, and gives a lot of synopsis and useful information. And so, um, all of that being said, I've sort of woven all the way around from climate change back to what we do, but I just wanted to sort of share the my thoughts in terms of where we're going and what are the sort of priorities of the things that we're facing. So with that, I will look at the chat again and take some more questions. Let's see here. I was already depressed. Sorry. I really hope that the flexible thinking and the tools that you have and all of that will sort of buoy you against the enormity of the challenges that we face. Astronauts, not aliens. We actually get a big kick out of walking up to people when they're staring at us and saying, "Greetings, Earthlings, we come in peace." Even my 9-year-old will do it now in our Pappers, and she usually gets a really great reception. In fact, we had to go into Home Depot the other day. It was unavoidable. We put on our Pappers, and she walked up to the one of the people working there and said, "Greetings, Earthlings, I come in peace." And we had the best service. We had 3 people super attentive to us. I've never had that kind of service, even pre-pandemic in there, because they all thought it was just really cute and funny, I guess, that we were little aliens walking around. So astronauts, aliens, either one, but it's definitely less stressful for us. Great. I found the City Prepping YouTube channel useful too. Yeah, I really like the way that the information is sort of bulleted, and he tries to insulate from any kind of political things. So, any other questions, comments about anything that we've discussed today? Well, I hope this was helpful. And I do plan on trying to keep up with not only the topic focused presentations, but sort of some more of these kind of catch-all topics that we can discuss as we move through this together. So thank you guys for being my community and for walking through it with me. And definitely, certainly, please continue in the Facebook pages. Let us know the topics that you're interested in. You can also message ModMin if there's something that you want to hear about, or you have an idea that you would like to discuss. We're certainly willing and happy to do more of these things to kind of bring things up for the forefront. The info on Prophy, there is a Prophy group, Still COVIDing with Prophy Nasal Spray. There are also 2 videos on our Still COVIDing YouTube channel. If you haven't found the Still COVIDing YouTube channel, I would really encourage you. We're trying to get the word out to everyone that this is here, and we're trying to do a much better job of posting all of these little chats and all of our informational videos for people who can't necessarily attend them live or want to refer back to them. So we just recently did Prophy nasal spray and their data for influenza A, including the bird flu H5N1. And then we also have a prior Prophy video that goes over some of their data as well. So there's Prophy data on the website, and then there's also Prophy data in the groups. Here's also that discussion of going from N95 to PAPR and how we sort of walked through the mask journey. And we're going to come, I think it's the first week of September. Sean will come back and we'll talk about where we are now with the PAPR discussion. So you can find that info there. PAPR question. My VersaFlow has huge gaps near the ears. Do I need to worry about that? As long as they're not more than 3 inches, you do not need to worry about that, except for it might make it a little bit more noisy for you to hear. So you might find it useful if you sort of rearrange the gap so it's not blowing directly into your ears, but the positive pressure of the air in PAPRs will actually be really protective, even if you do not have to have a seal like you do in a regular mask. And we'll be talking more about that in our discussion about PAPRs. And you can also join our PAPR group, Still COVIDing PAPR Party, and see the impressive holes that people have cut in their PAPRs and then porta counted to show the protective ability of PAPRs without a seal. When do you hope to post this video for this talk to the Still COVIDing YouTube channel? That all depends on how busy I get at work tomorrow and how fast YouTube is at processing the video. Once I get done with the video and record it, when I click out of the Zoom, it will process it for me, and that takes a little while. And then, of course, I have to upload it to YouTube. So I will definitely get it out before I go on our float trip on Sunday, but it will be posted before then. Is the YouTube channel public? Can I share it with friends that aren't coding? Absolutely. It is, one of our educational efforts. We really want people to come and find the information that is posted there and be able to keep themselves safe. What mask would you recommend if planning to travel by airplane? Would it be PAPR, N95? So much to choose from. That's a great question. So most PAPRs are not, well, I don't think any of the PAPRs are actually quote unquote approved for air travel. There are some people who have been able to fly in a clean space. Now, clean space is really expensive, and if you don't have one, I think it's about $1,500 or $1,600 to get one. So it's definitely a major investment, and there's no guarantee that you will be able to keep it on throughout the whole process. There is a discussion of that in our PAPR group, and people do talk about how they have done it, how they've gotten like the clear pass, and how they've been able to navigate and keep their clean space on. Clean space also only has a battery life of 6 hours. So if your flight's longer than 6 hours, you are going to run out of battery. So all of that being said, the most practical thing for most people to do when they are on a flight right now is to wear a N95 or a P100. I would probably be very tempted to fly either in our secure clicks or in our V-flexes with a SIP valve, depending on the length of the flight. If I were having a little 2 or 3 hour flight, I would probably just do that in the secure click and pre-hydrate really, really well, and then be determined not to eat or drink while I was on the plane. If I was taking a longer flight, then I would want a SIP valve. And so I would probably use what the mask nerd wears on planes, which is the V-Flex or whatever mask fits you. Obviously, you definitely need to have a fit tested mask. And I would put a SIP valve in it, and I would just basically have some nutritional shakes or drinks if I were to fly. And I would definitely use my Prophy nasal spray before I went on a flight. You went to Home Depot because it was unavoidable. Do you still feel nervous going to places like that, even in your PAPR? Honestly, I believe you can go anywhere in a PAPR now, and I'm not really nervous about it from a transmission standpoint. I do always wonder sometimes if we might eventually run into trouble of someone being nasty to me or my kids. If someone's nasty to me, I don't really care. But it would bother me that someone was nasty to my kids in a PAPR. So that's probably more of a worry than I firmly believe we won't catch COVID in a PAPR, even if we're in a COVID positive space. So I'm not nervous about that. But I would probably be I'm a little bit more nervous about reception from people, but not enough that it's going to bother me to do it, and mostly because it would bother my kids, if that makes sense. Christina's notes will go up tonight. That's great. Do you change and shower after going indoors with a pepper? We do this. It is something that my younger son doesn't love. Honestly, I don't anymore. I used to. And that will change if or when H5N1 and monkeypox take off, because H5N1 and monkeypox are fomite transmitted. COVID is really not a huge fomite issue. I know there are people who still are very conservative about the way that they treat fomites with COVID, but honestly, in my personal opinion, it is highly unlikely that you are going to catch a COVID infection from fomites. And so because of that, I no longer feel compelled to shower and change my clothes and all of that, beyond what I would like normally do in a public situation, which is, if I'm in a healthcare environment, I do often, spray my shoes down with Lysol or some other kind of cleaning thing, or leave them outside. Obviously, I wash my hands pretty thoroughly, especially before I'm going to do any food prep or all of that. But no, I don't do the whole shower thing. Sometimes we change our clothes depending on where we've been. Some places are just sort of icky, but that's more for general hygiene and not necessarily because I think I'm going to catch COVID for something that's on my clothes. My rule is to shower as soon as I get in the house. So that's perfectly reasonable. I would just say if I'm showering as soon as I get in the house, it's not for COVID, it's for the other buggies that you can pick up. Let me see. Do you wear a mask under your pepper for source control? I do not. I do not go, I would not be in a pepper in public if I were positive for COVID. I do have a Plus Life machine at home and test with some regularity. So I'm fairly confident that I'm not spreading COVID to other people. Now, the caveat is if I were around other COVIDing people who did want source control, then yes. But if I'm out in public where everybody's walking around raw dogging the air, then I am not wearing a source control. Now, I do actually keep a mask in my pocket at all times. And all of my kids, we always have a backup mask in our pocket or our bag, because if you have a mechanical failure on a pepper, then you're definitely going to want to be able to quickly get into a different mask. But personally, I fall in if you're in a public environment where there is not source control, I'm probably the safest person that those people are around in terms of my exposure risks, and I do not use source control. And I know people's opinions on that vary. Okay. Well, it's about 9:30 right on the dot. Like I said, thanks for being part of our community and for taking the time to come in and consider these issues with us. And we will be around to do more of this in the future.